Hunger was a predator. It stalked Harper Lawson through the dusty streets of Silveridge, Montana, its claws digging into her empty stomach. The sun was a hammer, beating down on her tattered blue dress, a dress that had once seen ballrooms in St. Louis. Now it was just a rag, frayed and faded like her hope. She twisted the gold band on her finger, her mother's wedding ring, the last piece of a life that had turned to ash. The smell of fresh bread from the general store was a sweet kind of torture. 3 days. It had been 3 days since she'd eaten. The hunger was so bad she was finally ready to do the unthinkable, to trade her last treasure for a loaf of bread. Harper pushed open the door. A little bell announced her arrival, the sound of a ghost entering the world of the living. The shopkeeper, a stout man with glasses on his nose, didn't even look up. "What do you need, miss?" he asked, his voice flat. Her own voice was a dry whisper. "I'd like to make a trade." She slid the ring from her finger. Her hand trembled as she placed it on the worn wooden counter. "For bread." The shopkeeper picked it up. He held it to the light, his expression souring. "Not worth much," he grunted. "Half a loaf. Maybe." "Please," Harper begged, the tears she'd been fighting finally winning. "It's real gold. It was my mother's." "Real gold, maybe," he said, sliding it back toward her. "But thin as a promise. Times are hard, miss." A shadow fell over the counter. The bell had rung again, but she hadn't noticed. A deep voice came from behind her, a voice that sounded like rocks and whiskey. "2 loaves of your freshest bread, Jim," the voice said, "and put whatever else the lady needs on my account." Harper spun around. A tall man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He stepped into the light, and she saw him clearly. A worn leather vest, dusty boots, and a hat pushed back to reveal sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. The shopkeeper straightened up fast. "Of course, Mr. Ironwood. Right away." The stranger's eyes found Harper's, and she felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. He nodded toward the ring on the counter. "Keep it," he said, his voice quiet. Her pride, starved but not dead, flared up. "I don't accept charity, sir." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It's not charity, it's a job offer." He took a step closer. "I'm Vaughn Ironwood. I own the Double Bar Ranch. I need a housekeeper. Pay is room and board." She stared at him, her mind reeling. A job, a home. It was everything she needed. But to go off with a man she didn't know? "I don't know you, Mr. Ironwood. Ask anyone," he said with a shrug. "I'll wait." The shopkeeper bustled back, placing 2 warm, fragrant loaves on the counter. "He's good for his word, miss," he offered. "Finest ranch in the territory. Lost his housekeeper last month. She up and got married." Harper looked back at Vaughn Ironwood. There was no trickery in his eyes, just a straightforward offer. The difference between life and death. "Why help me?" she asked. "Everyone needs a hand sometimes," he said simply. "Besides, I've been eating my own cooking. Another day, and I might poison myself." Against all odds, she laughed. The sound was rusty, foreign. "I'm Harper Lawson," she said, holding out a hand. "I accept." He took her hand, his grip firm and brief. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the bread. "We'll head out as soon as I'm done in town." She didn't know what was waiting for her at the Double Bar Ranch. She didn't know the secrets hidden behind those clear blue eyes. She just knew he had offered her a choice, and she had no idea she was a pawn in a game that had started long before she ever set foot in Silveridge. The ride to the Double Bar was 2 hours of swaying silence and unspoken questions. Harper clutched her small bag, the entire sum of her life, and watched the Montana landscape roll by in waves of gold and green. "It's beautiful," she said, just to break the quiet. "Most days," Vaughn agreed. "Other days, it tries to kill you." He told her about the ranch. His father had started it with nothing but a dream. Now it was 20,000 acres and 2,000 head of cattle. "And your family?" she asked. A shadow passed over his face, quick as a cloud. Lost my parents a few years back. Influenza. Just me and my younger brother Vernon now. And he's in Denver on business. She told him she had lost her parents too. She didn't tell him the rest of it. The betrayal. The fiancé who had ruined her father and then tried to own her. The reason she had run. That story was too heavy to share with a stranger. When they crested a hill, the ranch came into view. It was a fortress. A sprawling main house of log and stone. A massive barn. A bunkhouse. It was a kingdom carved out of the wilderness. Home, Vaughn said, and the single word was filled with a fierce, lonely pride. A weathered foreman named Hank greeted them, his eyes sharp and questioning as he looked Harper up and down. Vaughn showed her to her room. It was small, but it was clean, with a window that looked out onto a garden. After weeks of sleeping in barns, it felt like a palace. It seemed too good to be true, and Harper knew, better than most, that if something seems too good to be true, it always is. Vaughn Ironwood seemed like an honorable man, but she'd been fooled by an honorable man before. That night, she cooked for him and his men. Simple food, but hot and plentiful. For the first time in months, she felt useful. She felt safe. But as she lay in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, a cold knot of doubt tightened in her stomach. Why her? Why had he picked a complete stranger, a woman at the end of her rope, and brought her into the heart of his home? There was a story here she didn't know. A secret hidden in the shadows of this sprawling, lonely ranch. And she had a terrible feeling that she hadn't just been hired. She had been chosen. The days at the double bar fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Harper cooked and cleaned, turning the dusty masculine house back into a home. She revived the kitchen garden. She found a rhythm in the work, a peace in the routine. Vaughn was a ghost. He was gone before she woke, back long after she'd cleaned the supper dishes. He was a presence she felt more than saw. But she knew he was watching her. Sometimes she'd look up and find his eyes on her, his expression unreadable. She explored the ranch, piece by piece. The barn, filled with the warm, clean smell of horses and hay. The smokehouse, the chicken coop. And then, one afternoon, she found the grave. It was under a big cottonwood tree, a simple stone marker half hidden by wildflowers. Fresh wildflowers. Someone had been there recently. The inscription was simple. Sarah Ironwood, beloved wife, and a date. She had died only 1 year ago, in childbirth. The baby, a son, was buried with her. Harper's blood ran cold. The shopkeeper had said Vaughn's last housekeeper had left a month ago to get married. But Hank, the foreman, had said something different. "About time we got some decent cooking again," he'd said, as if it had been a long, long time. Vaughn had lied, not just a small lie, a deliberate one. He wasn't just a widower. He was a grieving man, tending his wife's grave in secret. The knowledge made him more human, more tragic, and more dangerous. What else was he lying about? The answer was waiting for her in the house. A locked door at the end of the main hall. Vaughn had told her it was his late wife's sewing room. He kept it locked, he'd said. Too painful to go in there. One afternoon, while cleaning his study, she found a ring of old keys tucked away in a drawer. One was small, ornate. She knew, with a sudden chilling certainty, what it was for. Her hands trembled as she stood before the locked door. She shouldn't. It was a violation of his trust, his grief. But she had to know. The lies were a puzzle, and she felt like a piece was just on the other side of this door. The key turned. The lock clicked. She pushed the door open. It wasn't a sewing room. It was an office, a command center, and the walls were covered with maps of St. Louis, shipping routes, bank records, and dozens of notes, all centered around one name, a name that made the air freeze in her lungs. Howard Maxwell, the man she had run from, her corrupt, predatory ex-fiancé. Vaughn hadn't just been kind. He hadn't just offered her a job. He had been looking for her. The chance meeting in the general store was no chance at all. It was an interception, a capture. She backed out of the room, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a prisoner. She had run from one cage right into another. She turned to flee, to run back to her room, to pack her bag. And she ran straight into Vaughn. He was standing in the hallway, his face a mask of stone, his blue eyes cold as ice. He had been watching her. He had been waiting for her to find it. "I was wondering how long it would take you," he said, his voice quiet and deadly. "Now that you know, I think it's time we had a real conversation, Miss Lawson." "You lied to me," Harper whispered, her voice trembling as she backed away from him down the hall. Everything was a lie. Vaughn didn't move. He just watched her, his expression unreadable. "Not everything," he said. "But the part about me needing a housekeeper? That was a lie." He had known who she was from the moment she walked into that store. He had been waiting for her. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her back hitting the wall. "The same thing Howard Maxwell wants," he said, his voice a low growl. "Something your father left you!" Her mind reeled. What was he talking about? Her father had left her nothing but debts and her mother's wedding ring. Vaughn took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "Howard Maxwell didn't just ruin your father," he said, the words sharp as broken glass. "He ruined mine, too. They were partners. Maxwell cheated him, forged his name, and left him to die penniless." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Their families, connected by a betrayal she never knew existed. "My wife," Vaughn continued, his voice now rough with a grief that felt raw and new. "Sarah, she was Maxwell's daughter." Harper gasped. This was impossible. "He sent her here to spy on me," Vaughn said, his voice full of a bitter self-loathing. "To find the proof my father hid. The proof that could destroy Maxwell. But she fell in love with me. She was trying to help me when she died." He looked away, his jaw tight. "Maxwell said it was childbirth. I think he had her murdered." He looked back at her, and his eyes were filled with a burning, desperate need. "Sarah never found the documents, but my father was a careful man. He told me he'd made a copy. He told me he sent it to the only other man Maxwell had wronged. Your father, Harper." He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "He sent it to your father for safekeeping. I know he left it for you. Maxwell knows it too. That's why he wanted to marry you. Not for you, for what you have, for what you don't even know you possess." Harper stared at him, speechless. It couldn't be. All she had left was her mother's ring. She twisted it on her finger, a nervous, unconscious habit. Vaughn's eyes locked onto the movement, a sudden, sharp intake of breath. "The ring," he whispered, his gaze intense. "That's not just a ring, is it?" Before she could react, he took her hand. His touch was gentle but firm. He turned the ring over, his thumb finding a tiny, almost invisible seam. He twisted. The top of the ring popped open, revealing a tiny, hollow compartment. It wasn't a ring. It was a locket. And inside, folded into a square no bigger than her littlest fingernail, was a piece of paper, thin as a moth's wing. He carefully took it out, his big, rough fingers surprisingly deft. He unfolded it. It wasn't a document. It was a key, a tiny, intricate key for a safe deposit box, and beneath it, a number. "He found it," Vaughn breathed, his eyes shining with a fierce, triumphant light. My God, he found it. The truth was here, in her hands all along. The key to Howard Maxwell's destruction. And the reason Vaughn Ironwood had brought her to his ranch. But they weren't the only ones who knew the secret. A new threat was already on its way. Because Howard Maxwell was not a man who gave up on what he believed was his. And he was coming to Montana to collect. The key changed everything. It sat on the table between them, a tiny piece of brass that held the weight of 2 families, 2 fortunes, and a generation of lies. Harper stared at it, her world completely upended. Her entire past was a fraud. Her future was a question mark. "The safe deposit box is in St. Louis," she said, her voice hollow. No, Vaughn said, his eyes still fixed on the key. My father was smarter than that. He wouldn't have kept the proof in Maxwell's territory. He opened accounts in every major city under a different name. This key is for the bank in Silveridge, the local bank, run by Edmund Henderson, the man who had been trying to buy Vaughn's land, the man who had tried to foreclose on him. It all snapped into place. Henderson wasn't just a greedy banker. He was working for Maxwell. He had been trying to get his hands on the ranch because he too believed the documents were hidden here. He's been playing me this whole time, Vaughn said, his voice a low growl of fury, trying to squeeze me out, thinking he could find the papers after I was gone. He knows about the key, Harper whispered, a new wave of fear washing over her. He knows it exists, Vaughn corrected her. He just doesn't know you're the one who has it. But Maxwell does. And he's coming. The threat was no longer a distant possibility. It was a ticking clock. That night, a rider came from town. It was Charlie, one of the younger ranch hands. His face was pale. "Boss," he said, breathing hard. "There's a man in town, at the hotel, asking questions about you, and about a woman from St. Louis. Maxwell's scout. He was here." Vaughn's face was grim. "They know you're here, Harper. We're out of time." The plan was simple, desperate. They would go to the bank at dawn, as soon as it opened. They would use the key, get the documents, and take them straight to the federal marshal in the next county, bypassing the corrupt local sheriff. But as they rode toward Silveridge in the pre-dawn darkness, a strange, orange glow appeared on the horizon, a glow that was coming from the direction of the ranch. "No!" Vaughn breathed. They wheeled their horses around and raced back, the sickening smell of smoke filling the air. They crested the final hill and saw it. The main house, their home, was a raging inferno. Henderson's men. They hadn't waited. They had come to burn the evidence they thought was hidden inside. They had come to burn them alive. Hank and the other ranch hands were fighting the blaze, a hopeless battle against the flames. "They came in fast," Hank yelled over the roar. "Set fires in 3 places at once. We never had a chance." Vaughn stared at the burning ruins of his family's legacy, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. This wasn't about business anymore. This was a declaration of war. They had lost the house, but they still had the key. They rode back toward town, their faces streaked with soot and fury. But as they approached, they saw a group of riders blocking the road. Henderson and a dozen of his men. They were waiting for them. "Looking for this, Ironwood?" Henderson called out, holding up a familiar leather satchel. It was Harper's, the one she'd left in her room. He must have sent men to search it while the others set the fire. He opened the satchel and pulled out her mother's ring. And the key. He must have found the secret compartment. "It's over," Henderson said with a triumphant sneer. "Maxwell will be very pleased." He tossed the key to one of his men. "Take this back to the bank. Put it in the vault. We'll deal with these two." Harper's heart sank. They had lost. It was all for nothing. But as the man with the key turned to ride away, Vaughn moved. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was something else, something faster, colder, deadlier. His gun was in his hand, a blur of motion. A single shot echoed in the morning air. The rider cried out and tumbled from his saddle, the key flying from his hand and landing in the dust. All hell broke loose. Henderson's men opened fire. Vaughn shoved Harper behind the wagon, providing covering fire as the air filled with the scream of bullets and the smell of gunpowder. The ranch hands, who had followed them from the fire, joined the fight. It was a desperate, brutal shootout on the edge of town. And they were hopelessly outnumbered. One by one, the ranch hands fell. Hank went down, a bullet in his leg. Charlie was hit in the shoulder. Vaughn fought like a cornered wolf, his face a grim mask of determination. But it was a losing battle. Henderson, seeing his chance, spurred his horse forward, his gun aimed right at Vaughn. Harper screamed, but before he could fire, a new sound cut through the chaos. A volley of rifle fire from the ridge above them. Henderson cried out as a bullet tore through his shoulder, his gun clattering to the ground. His men, caught in a crossfire, threw down their weapons and surrendered. A dozen riders came down from the ridge. They weren't lawmen. They were ranchers. The same men Henderson had been squeezing for years. The blacksmith, the stableman, the men from the dry side of the valley. They had seen the fire. They had heard the gunshots. And they had finally had enough. As the dust settled, Vaughn rushed to Harper's side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hands checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," she said, her voice shaking. "But the key—" They looked around frantically. In the chaos, it was gone. Snatched up by one of Henderson's men who had escaped in the confusion. They had won the battle, but they had lost the war. The proof was gone. Just then, a fancy carriage came rolling down the road from town. It stopped, and a well-dressed, silver-haired man stepped out. Howard Maxwell. He looked at the scene. The wounded men, the surrendered gunmen, the defeated Henderson, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "Seems you've had a busy morning, Mr. Ironwood," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "A valiant effort, but ultimately pointless." He held up his hand, and in it, glinting in the morning sun, was the key. "I believe this belongs to me," he said. It was over. He had won. He held all the cards, but he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated the woman standing next to Vaughn Ironwood. Howard Maxwell stood there, the key in his hand, a look of absolute triumph on his face. He had the proof. He had won. "A pity about your ranch, Ironwood," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "But business is business." He turned his cold eyes to Harper. "As for you, my dear, it's time to come home. Your little adventure is over." He expected her to weep, to beg. He expected her to be the broken, frightened girl he had driven out of St. Louis. He didn't know that girl was gone forever. "You're right about one thing, Howard," Harper said, her voice surprisingly calm, steady. "My adventure is over, but yours is just beginning." Maxwell laughed. "Brave words, my dear, but you have nothing. I have the key. I have the proof." "Do you?" Harper asked, and a strange, small smile touched her lips. "Are you sure that's the right key?" A flicker of doubt crossed Maxwell's face. He looked down at the key in his hand. "You see," Harper continued, her voice gaining strength, "my mother was a very clever woman. She knew my father was in danger. She knew he had proof against you. So she made a copy of that key. A perfect copy." She reached up and touched the simple gold band on her finger, her mother's wedding ring. "She told me to never take it off. She said it would keep me safe." With a deft twist, she separated the two halves of the ring. It wasn't a solid band. It was a fake shell, held together by a tiny, intricate clasp. And nestled inside, hidden for years, was another key, the real key. Maxwell stared, his face turning from triumph to disbelief, to pure, unadulterated rage. He had been played. "You're lying!" he snarled. "Am I?" Harper said. She turned to the assembled ranchers. "My father, Charles Lawson, was partners with this man. Maxwell cheated him, stole his company, and left him to die. My fiancé, Vaughn Ironwood's father, was his other partner. Maxwell did the same to him. The proof of those crimes is in a safe deposit box in the Silveridge Bank. And this," she said, holding up the real key, "is how we get it." The story was finally out. The truth, in all its ugly detail. The ranchers who had come to fight for their land now realized they were fighting for something much bigger. They were fighting for justice. Maxwell, cornered and desperate, lunged for Harper, trying to snatch the key. But Vaughn was there in an instant, his arm like a bar of steel, knocking him to the ground. The fight was over. The lies were dead. The documents in the safe deposit box were even more damning than they had imagined. They detailed years of fraud, extortion, and bribery. They implicated not just Maxwell and Henderson, but a half-dozen other powerful men, all the way to the territorial government. The arrests were swift. The trials were the talk of the territory. The empire built on greed and betrayal crumbled to dust. The Double Bar Ranch was rebuilt, bigger and stronger than before, with the help of a grateful community. Harper's land in St. Louis was restored to her, its value now a fortune. But she sold it. She invested every penny back into the ranch, into the land that was now her home. The wedding took place a year later, on a perfect autumn day. It was held in the meadow by the small lake, the place Vaughn's father had called Sarah's Mirror. Harper wore a dress of pale blue silk, and on her finger was the pearl ring Vaughn's mother had worn. And around her neck, on a simple gold chain, hung 2 keys, one real, one a copy, a reminder of the secrets that had brought them together, and the truth that had set them free. They had both lost their families to the same man's greed. They had both been set adrift in the world. But in each other, they had found more than just a partner. They had found a home. Harper and Vaughn's story teaches us that sometimes the things we think we've lost are just waiting to be found again in a different form, and that the greatest treasures are not the ones we inherit, but the ones we build with our own 2 hands, with courage and with love. If their story of justice and redemption inspired you, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell us in the comments, what do you think is worth sacrificing everything for? Thanks for watching.